We have DeAndre Hopkins news. We have Jimmy Garoppolo news. We have a lot to get through. I mean, we may be dropping a player like DJ Moore down our rankings for no apparent reason. But before we get into it, go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And of course, if you want to get all my 2023 fantasy football rankings, you can find them on flockfantasy.com. When you sign up for flockfantasy.com with promo code FLOCK, you are going to get 30% off any subscription. You're going to get my 2023 fantasy football rankings, all the premium content of all your favorite content creators, and with promo code FLOCK, yours truly will go through and make a podcast breaking down your fantasy football team. But that should be it. Let's go into this, and let's start it off with Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, 1 and 2. I'm not going to waste your time. They're great. I will draft them at number 1 and number 2 consistently ahead of Christian McCaffrey. Doesn't really matter the format that you're playing in. Maybe if you're playing in like a super shallow redraft league with your college buddies where it's just 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex, and you're saying, Mason, come on, man. These guys are bums. These guys are going to let me go through, and they're going to let me draft Hollywood Brown in round 8. I'm going to be getting Chris Godwin round 7. I can find wide receiver value with ease later on in this draft. And sure, maybe, just maybe, you don't have to take Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase at 1 or 2. In reality, you're better off taking them there. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to be looking at Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp. Now, last time we were here, right, I was sitting here going, well, you know what? I'm going to go back and forth between these two guys. Because obviously with Cooper Kupp, when he has been healthy over the past 2 seasons, Cooper Kupp has undoubtedly been the number 1 wide receiver overall in fantasy. I mean, 2 years ago, Cooper Kupp won the Triple Crown, led the NFL in receptions, in receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. So I thought that Kupp would be in contention, and when we went through to update our rankings for this month, I really tried to go through and try to put Cooper Kupp at pick 3. The reason I can't do it, the reason that I won't do it this year is, 1, I mean, Tyreek Hill is pretty damn good. And 2, if you're looking at the Las Vegas win totals that you have for the Los Angeles Rams this next season, Vegas sportsbooks are putting the Rams at 6.5 for their over-under on the amount of wins that they will see this next season. So you're getting the Los Angeles Rams priced in to be one of the worst teams in the NFL. There are very few teams right now that have a projected win total as low as the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, you have like the Cardinals, you have the Texans, teams that we'll get to in just 1 second. That's why I'm going to be keeping Kupp down here at 4, even if I really want to move him up to 3. And then our next tier, we're going to be looking at Stefan Diggs at 5 now. I have drafted so much Stefan Diggs this year. You know, I'm already 150 underdog drafts deep. And the reason I've drafted so much Stefan Diggs is because in general, in those underdog drafts where it's so difficult to find wide receiver value later on, I'm going to be taking Stefan Diggs over Bijan Robinson. I'm going to be taking him over Travis Kelce. I've been taking Stefan Diggs in so many of these. And I'm getting a little worried, ladies and gentlemen. At the time of this recording, DeAndre Hopkins has his favorite team, according to Vegas sportsbooks, the most likely landing spot being the Buffalo Bills. Last time I checked, the Bills were plus 300 to land DeAndre Hopkins. And if Hopkins were to go over to Buffalo, you better believe all those teams that I drafted Stefan Diggs with in round 1 will be looking like garbage, because Stefan Diggs at that point would be falling down these rankings dramatically. Like if I'm looking at this list right now, I would probably move Stefan Diggs down to about the wide receiver 11 or 12 on this list if DeAndre Hopkins were to go over to Buffalo. But we'll get to Hopkins in 1 second. Let's talk about A.J. Brown. With Brown, not worried about DeAndre Hopkins going over to Philadelphia, right? I mean, if DeAndre Hopkins were to go over to Philly, I mean, just GG, good luck, everybody, stopping this Philadelphia Eagles offense with a great offensive line with Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, DeAndre Swift. They have literally everybody. In reality, it's not happening. A.J. Brown is going to be playing alongside Smith and Dallas Goedert, which, I mean, hell, they are very, very good competition in their own right. Now, what is nice about this Philadelphia Eagles offense is, obviously, it's elite, and B, they don't really spread the ball around. I mean, you are getting a intense amount of targets going to just those three names in particular. We'll talk about Smith in just 1 second. I'm a little bit worried if you're looking at the production that you had from Brown as well as Devonta Smith this past year, because it may be skewed with Dallas Goedert, but we'll talk about it in a second. Let's go over and instead let's look at CeeDee Lamb. So this is another update that we made, right? I mean, previous to this, we had CeeDee Lamb behind Devonte Adams, but Lamb has no questions surrounding him, right? I mean, CeeDee Lamb posted almost 1,400 receiving yards last season at 23 years old. The man is almost as young as Zay Flowers. The man is younger than Kenny Pickett. CeeDee Lamb is still an ascending player in an offense that I honestly think will probably get a little bit better this next season. Clearly, the Dallas Cowboys had a stretch of games where their defense was just so dominant, they didn't have to throw the ball, right? So the passing volume was limited in Dallas, which I think you get a step forward in that area this next season. And if we are projecting this out for CeeDee Lamb, hell, you have Dak. Where we're going over in Las Vegas, we don't know who you have. Devonte Adams clearly is a wide receiver with a ton of talent, right? If you're looking at Devonte Adams over the last 3 to 4 seasons, there's been nobody that has held a consistent target share up there with him. He is consistently at 28% of his team's targets on a per game basis, which is just absolutely absurd. I mean, that's an elite level talent. Now, the issue, right, is if you're looking at this with Devonte Adams, this is a wide receiver that at best has Jimmy Garoppolo. And Jimmy Garoppolo failed his physical. The Las Vegas Raiders could move on from Jimmy G and pay him $0 this next year. Devonte Adams is frustrated in Vegas. Now, of course, he's still so damn good that it's not like we can move him down all the way to wide receiver 15 by any means, just because, I mean, there are some just outside red flags for the Raiders, but still, I think you could safely move him behind CeeDee Lamb, right? Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to have some great young talents. We're going to have Garrett Wilson, then Amon-Ra St. Brown. So we recently did move up Garrett Wilson. You have to keep in mind, you have Aaron Rodgers coming over. This is probably the biggest quarterback upgrade this offseason, going from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers for Garrett Wilson. Now, of course, this is a great player in his own right. He was a phenomenal rookie. He was an elite prospect coming out of Ohio State. I mean, the man was a borderline top 10 NFL draft pick. Garrett Wilson was going to be phenomenal this next season regardless of who his quarterback is. Now, with Rodgers, I don't necessarily think this is MVP level Rodgers. This past season was pretty much the worst year we've seen from Rodgers. I mean, essentially since like his first year starting. So I don't think Rodgers is an elite quarterback anymore. I do think he is a much, much, much better quarterback than Zach Wilson. And I do think Garrett Wilson's phenomenal no matter what. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown, our next guy, I'm not worried about Jameson Williams. Okay, yeah, Jameson Williams maybe comes in and improves the overall offense by stretching the field, by keeping two safeties back. But Amon-Ra St. Brown will be that guy that's going to command volume underneath. And that's what we want from a fantasy football perspective. Keep in mind, Jameson also suspended 4-6 games. You've seen nothing from Jameson Williams in his NFL career, obviously due to the injury. But I'm not going to be moving Amon-Ra St. Brown down, who's a stud, because of some Jameson Williams threat. Don't be scared about it. Now, our next guy in this tier is going to be Jaylen Waddle. Now, with Waddle, I mean, this was my most drafted wide receiver on Underdog last year. Underdog drafts last year, we were getting him in the 4th round over and over and over again. He's partially one of the reasons we won $150,000 on Underdog last season. I haven't been able to draft him as much this year because now he goes in the middle of the 2nd. But I do think you can get improvement from Jaylen Waddle going into this next season. The big thing is Tua led the NFL last year in adjusted yards per pass attempt. I understand nobody likes Tua. I don't know why. I think Tua's a good quarterback. And if Tua's fully healthy this next year, I think you're actually going to see a bump for Waddle and possibly Tyreek. Keep in mind, Waddle dealt with his own injury last season. Now, I'm not drafting him as much, of course, because we're no longer getting him in the 4th. You have to take him in the 2nd. But someone I'm drafting a ton in the 2nd round on Underdog because generally falls way below these other wide receivers in this tier, and I think he belongs with them, is going to be Chris Olave. If you're looking at Chris Olave, I mean, we've already showed you his rookie season numbers and how it stacks up historically to other players that you saw go in round 1 in the NFL draft. You literally have that rookie season comparing to only options like Odell Beckham Jr., Mike Evans, Julio Jones, AJ Green. I mean, with Chris Olave here, this is a wide receiver that was on a natural trajectory to be a wide receiver one in fantasy, regardless of what happened with this quarterback position. But similar to Garrett Wilson, you are getting that quarterback upgrade. You're going from a 35-year-old Andy Dalton to now you're getting Derek Carr. Now, trust me, I'm not the biggest Derek Carr guy in the world, but I think he's much better than 35-year-old Andy Dalton, or at least I hope he is. A big thing we also need to see in New Orleans is we have to quit it with this Taysom Hill stuff, right? If you want Kamara, if you want Jamal Williams, if you want Condre Miller, if you want Chris Olave, if you want these guys to surpass their ADP, what you're really needing to see is just a step back overall from the involvement that you're getting from Taysom Hill, and he has to stop vulturing these rushing touchdowns. But quick side note, of course, if you're wanting to draft Chris Olave in the second round, if you're wanting to go out there and get into some fantasy football drafts with us, you know, we are drafting every single day on the live stream. We are drafting on Underdog Fantasy. When you sign up to Underdog with promo code FLOCK, you're going to get a 100% deposit match. With promo code FLOCK, you will get my 2023 fantasy football rankings. You will get a free trial to flockfantasy.com. And most importantly, you can get in a draft in almost every single state. You can see the map here. Make sure you use promo code FLOCK so you can get all that awesome stuff and draft with us in the live stream. Now, going over to our next spot, we're going to be looking at T. Higgins as well as Devonta Smith. Now, I don't really want to talk too much about these individual players because we both know they're good. They're in great offenses. They're both wide receiver twos in said offenses. Now, right now, Smith goes ahead of T. Higgins in these underdog drafts. I personally prefer T. Higgins there in the late second round, but I do want to talk about the scenario that I possibly would take Devonta Smith in, right? Because what you've seen in a lot of these underdog drafts as of late is you've seen the top quarterbacks falling to the end of the second, where you'll be there and you'll be picking at, say, the 210 or the 209, and you're going, well, you know what? Right now we have Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen still available, and then I also have T. Higgins, Devonta Smith to choose from. And if you're sitting there, say at the 210, and all three of those quarterbacks are available to you, you can say, okay, well, yeah, I'm definitely going to get a quarterback making it back around to us at the beginning of the third. It's not like the team at the 211 is going to double tap the quarterback position, or the team at 212 is going to take two of these guys. So I'm essentially guaranteed to get one of these elite level quarterbacks. And if you find yourself in that scenario, what you want to do is you actually want to take Smith over Higgins, despite us ranking Higgins over Smith, because you have the possibility of getting Jalen Hurts making it back around to you at the beginning of the third. So if you think there's a chance you get Jalen Hurts at the beginning of the third round, at that point, I would take Devonta Smith over T. Higgins to get the correlation built into our lineup. However, if Jalen Hurts is already off the draft board, or if you don't want to be taking Jalen Hurts at the beginning of the third round, then I will go T. Higgins over Devonta Smith. And the reason for this is, while Smith definitely had a massive breakout and was a phenomenal player at Alabama, I mean, hell, he arguably had the best college football season of all time at the wide receiver position, you do see the breakout happen at the end of the year. I mean, at the same time, Dallas Goedert goes down. So if you were looking at the split with Devonta Smith with and without Dallas Goedert, I mean, it is concerning. It's hard to ignore that. And I would want to pump the brakes and be a little bit hesitant in saying that Smith is someone we should be going over and taking over T. Higgins. And keep in mind, with the T. Higgins case, Higgins is actually a little more impressive than what his raw points per game numbers indicate, because if you are looking at T. Higgins, this is a player that had 2 games where he played fewer than 5% of the snaps in those contests, which skews his per game statistics. If you remove those 2 contests, then all of a sudden T. Higgins looks like a low-end wide receiver 1, just as he was the season before. So I really like Higgins. I mean, Smith is strong as well, but I'm going to go Higgins unless I can get Jalen Hurts on the way back around. Now, going over to our next tier, it's going to be a big one, all right? We used to have DK Metcalf in his own tier here, but after looking at the Seattle Seahawks offense, well, yeah, Geno Smith maybe goes out there and Geno Smith has a million yards, 100 touchdowns, whatever you may say. There are only so many balls to go around, right? You have Jackson Smith-Njigba. You have Tyler Lockett, who will still be here this next season. I am a big Jackson Smith-Njigba believer. You also add in a receiving down running back in Zach Charbonnet. So if you're looking at the target share numbers here for DK Metcalf, I'm going to operate under the assumption that these actually come down compared to where they've been at over the past 3 years, because what you've seen in Seattle over the past 3 seasons is you've seen only 2 wide receiver sets. I mean, the only wide receivers in the field are DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, because the third guy there, is like 33-year-old Marquise Goodwin. Of course, you're not going to run a 3 wide receiver set if your next guy is Marquise Goodwin. But now that you have Jackson Smith-Njigba, I do think this changes the overall personnel for the Seattle Seahawks. I think Metcalf has to drop a tier down. And now our next guy, Deebo Samuel, 16. What you're really hoping for with Deebo, and of course I'm not hoping for this, but you're hoping that Trey Lance does not start in San Francisco. Lance, in my mind, actually would not be a good thing for Deebo Samuel, given the fact that Lance himself has all the rushing upside in the world. If you were looking at the average depth of target for Deebo Samuel is going to be a wide receiver that's kind of used as like a hybrid running back. I mean, he's right there at the line of scrimmage where you're wanting a pocket passing quarterback to dump the ball off to Deebo. I think that if Lance were to start, Lance actually steals a lot of that short area work just based off what he can do as a rusher. So, I mean, Deebo can be someone that moves up ahead of DK Metcalf if Brock Purdy's the guy, but honestly, I'm expecting Lance to be the guy. You know, he's my most drafted player. Now, going over to our next few spots, we're going to have Amari Cooper, Christian Watson, and Calvin Ridley. Don't really need to talk Amari, don't really need to talk Christian Watson. The main guy I need to be talking about here is Calvin Ridley, because Calvin Ridley is going a lot higher than this in these underdog drafts. I mean, you'll see Christian Watson go in like the middle of the 4th round, whereas Calvin Ridley is going in the middle of the 3rd round. I have not drafted Ridley at all, and it pains me. It pains me to do that. I thought Calvin Ridley coming off a suspension would be a wide receiver I was higher on than the average guy. I thought if I ranked Calvin Ridley in the 4th round, that would mean that I would get a ton of Calvin Ridley in these drafts, and I could go out there and I could root heavily on him this next season. But at the same time, even if we've seen an elite ceiling from Calvin Ridley back in 2020 in particular, I don't want to say it's the same situation as Michael Thomas, right? Clearly, it's not the same situation. But I would say Michael Thomas is maybe a good comparison in that we've seen the elite ceiling for Michael Thomas. It was back in 2019. Now, of course, with Michael Thomas, you're saying, okay, what's the realistic probability he ever gets back there? And I know Calvin Ridley is a different scenario. And I'm not even saying to draft Michael Thomas, but I'm just wanting to point out that we haven't seen the production so long from Calvin Ridley. Completely different situations, but it's priced as if Calvin Ridley is going to come in and immediately be the wide receiver 1 in Jacksonville, where you have Kirk, you have Zay Jones, you have Evan Ingram, you have Travis Etienne, you have a lot of weapons in this offense. So I'm going to be a little more hesitant on drafting Calvin Ridley than I thought most people are going to be. I don't know. I'm surprised to see him going this high. Now, our next tier is going to be the largest tier that you've ever seen. And this is what you kind of see at wide receiver, right? I mean, running back, you can get there and you can nitpick, and there are differences between every single RB. Whereas at wide receiver, if you're looking at a range of outcomes, say the wide receiver 16 from a fantasy points per game perspective is going to be averaging, say, 16 points per game. And you're looking at the wide receiver 30, that guy may be averaging about 14 points per game. We know once you get down to those low to mid wide receiver 2s, the wide receiver 3s, they're all about the same. So you're going to see a giant tier here. That's not to say these guys can't hit a higher ceiling, but it is to say I just think the range of outcomes is very similar for these players. Now, our next guy will be Jerry Jeudy at 20. With Jerry Jeudy, talked about this in a Dynasty video on the Dynasty Football Flock YouTube channel recently. But if we're looking at Jeudy here, it's a wide receiver that undoubtedly is the wide receiver 1 in Denver. I've said it for years. I've been made fun of for saying it for years. But at the same time, even if the offense will be better going into this next season, you have to be a little concerned that you just have more weapons, and this may be a more spread out offense overall. You add in Marvin Mims in the 2nd round in this year's NFL draft. You have Tim Patrick fully healthy this next season. They don't trade away Courtland Sutton. You have Greg Dulcich going into year 2. Possibly you have a healthy Javonte Williams this next year. So while Jerry Jeudy is definitely the top option in this offense, I don't necessarily know what kind of target share we should be expecting from the wide receiver 1 here. And then wide receiver 21, we're going to go DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, what's crazy is if you're looking at Las Vegas win totals right now, the Arizona Cardinals are sitting at 4.5. The Cardinals are supposed to be the worst team in the NFL, and it's not even supposed to be close. So even though Hopkins gets cut, he actually gets a bump in these drafts just because almost any situation outside of Arizona is better. And obviously, you're really hoping for Buffalo. You're really hoping for Kansas City if you are DeAndre Hopkins drafter. Now, I've drafted a lot of DeAndre Hopkins, but like I said, I've also drafted a lot of Stefan Diggs, and I've drafted none of Kadarius Toney or Travis Kelce. So I am heavily rooting for DeAndre Hopkins to go to the Chiefs here. Now, our next guy, Mike Williams. Mike Williams will be a little bit lower than this if you're not drafting on Underdog. Underdog's half PPR and it's best ball, so we're going to be trying to capture some of these spike weeks, of course. Now, we've seen a stretch of games 2 years ago where they decided to use Mike Williams as that prototypical alpha wide receiver. Clearly, that's not happening again, right? Clearly, Mike Williams is just the deep threat in this offense. You're going to have Keenan Allen operating underneath. Maybe you're going to have Quentin Johnson more as an intermediate guy. I don't know. I mean, Keenan Allen's going in like year 10 of his NFL career. It's half PPR, not full PPR. If you're playing in a full PPR non-best ball format, I think you go Keenan over Mike. Now, our next guy, we're going to be looking at Drake London. Yes, we will have Drake London over DJ Moore. We'll get to DJ Moore in just 1 second, but London as a rookie had a 29% market share number from a per game perspective. This is unheard of. If you're looking at 21-year-old rookies in years past, the guys right behind Drake London on this list are Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. This data tracks back all the way to 2000, and you actually have Drake London as the number one player at 21 years old, able to get that market share. You're really just having to bank that the Atlanta Falcons offense changes overall. Now, our next guy, we're going to go Terry McLaurin. With McLaurin, he's been a consistent low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 for years. He's had consistently bad quarterback play for years. Nothing's too different for his season this next year. Now, we're going to have Keenan Allen after this. Like I said, if you're playing in a full PPR format where it's not best ball, I'd be fine if you wanted to move Keenan Allen ahead of Mike Williams. This is more so specific to the format that we are drafting in this time of year, and I'm sure 99% of y'all right now are drafting on Underdog, so we're going to be mainly making these rankings for Underdog. 26, we will have Michael Pittman. With Michael Pittman, I think at this point of his career, we can say he's a very comparable talent to DJ Moore, who will obviously be our next guy. It's just difficult to project the Chicago Bears offense out. Y'all know I am completely fine drafting Justin Fields at the end of the 4th, the beginning of the 5th round, given all the rushing upside that he has. And I will be the first person to admit the Chicago Bears will most likely be the most improved passing offense this next season. But they were the worst passing offense we've seen in the NFL since 2010. They're the worst passing offense that we've seen in the NFL over the past decade, this past year. So even if they are vastly improved with a better offensive line, with DJ Moore coming over, do we expect them to go worst in the past decade to good? No. We're expecting them to go from worst in the past decade to bad. Anthony Richardson, maybe he's something. I don't know. That's why Pittman's going to be this low. 28, we're going to have Jackson Smith-Njigba. I don't know. I understand a lot of people are saying Tyler Lockett over JSN. I understand a lot of people are discounting Jackson Smith-Njigba given the amount of weapons you have in Seattle. This is an elite wide receiver prospect. At the end of the day, even if the situation is not great, I don't care. I love the player, and I'm going to be going for him. But I think that's all I have for y'all. Again, thank you so much if you watch this video. If you enjoyed it, please go down there, drop a like. Subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And of course, if you want to get access to my rankings, you can find those on flockfantasy.com. Promo code FLOCK for 30% off any subscription. And on top of that, if you want to get in a draft with us today or maybe get a free subscription to flockfantasy.com, you can do so by signing up to Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK. That link will also be in the description. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Really appreciate y'all. Really hope we get to see you with the video tomorrow.